SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and music on this Hump Day. We're running out of hump days in 2025, aren't we? We're just plowing right through here. And every day we inch closer to those lawmakers gathering up underneath that dome, and you and I'll be poring over all that legislation. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, we got to get to Christmas and New Year's for that, though.
That's true. You're right.
We have some good times before the bad times.
That's right. Hold on to your wallets, right, when they get down there and everything else you got. But no, we are all buckled up, ready to go here in the Element Wealth Studio. So I trust you had an enjoyable day off.
Oh, yeah.
You had to reschedule it, right?
Yeah, it was scheduled for Monday. Couldn't work out Monday. Came in with very little sleep Monday, made it through it, and then crashed out Monday night and had a nice day yesterday.
Good for you.
Last one of the year. Had to get it in before we ran out of time.
Yeah. Well, me too. We are out of days, and I'm appreciative to SuperTalk management for their generosity and let me take a day off here and there, and I enjoy getting out and about around the state. Typically what I'm doing when I'm off, helping with various events that has been a lot of fun, doing some speaking to groups and so forth. Truly enjoy that. So I also think we have completed our appointed remotes for the years, right? I don't think there are any more scheduled coming up, as I recall. I have to look at it, but because we have a master calendar with all that. I feel like
there's always a few right around Christmas, and we're not quite there yet.
Well, for Carter Jewelers, we do the cut-ins now, so we're not actually on location, but we do the cut-ins and the final segments of the 3 hours of the program. But
to be perfectly honest, I don't pay that close attention to that calendar because I'm usually right here.
Yeah, that's right. What happens. I do, because otherwise I won't know where to go, right? And my hope and prayer is that next year I don't have a flat tire headed up to a remote. Oh, man, that wasn't any fun. But, I'm already getting requests from our content director. That's the way it works around here, as our sales team goes out and sells remotes. Then they run that by our content director, who gets with the hosts of the various shows to determine if they're available. I'm already getting a bunch of those for next year, so it looks like we will have a busy 2026 out and about on the road across the great Magnolia State. Speaking of which, I believe it's the old birthday of the Magnolia State.
It is.
Today. Happy birthday to the great state of Mississippi. Yeah, so that's a big deal. We should certainly take a little stock in the birthday of Mississippi, the state formed on this day.
1817?
1817, right? December 10th, 1817. Mississippi became the 20th state admitted to the United States. So I just want you to know, my phone is ringing right now. And it's just bizarre to me. I get a ton of these, and this one's labeled as political call. What are the odds I'm going to take that one?
Slim to none in an average hour, but an hour when you're on the air, I would
zero.
Say zero, yeah.
But, and I've never taken one, so I don't know what the nature of the calls are. I'm not sure if that's like the party apparatus raising money, because typically those don't come identified, and I do take those calls because they don't appear to be spam. They appear to be legitimate. And I think sometimes they're from a Washington, D.C. area code, and that could be legitimate. So I do take those. But I don't know, is this a candidate? I'm not sure. But it's labeled clearly political call. You know, some of them say spam risk. This one says political call. So I'm wondering if we have some sort of rules around that, FCC rules or something that require so-called political calls to be branded as such, as the caller ID? I'm honestly not sure. But that's just interesting that would happen. But I obviously dispensed of that one, as you said. Speaking of politics, little bit of earth moved yesterday in an election that's kind of post the big election day of a couple of weeks ago. Down there in Miami, a Democrat won the Miami mayor's race. Now, you may think, and I think a lot of people in Mississippi probably do, well, I bet Miami, being a big metro port city, is probably a Democrat city. Turns out it's not. 30 years. For 30 years, the mayor of Miami has been a Republican. And the newly elected mayor, Eileen, that's how her name is pronounced, Elleen Higgins, won it yesterday, defeated a Republican endorsed by President Trump. 3-decade losing streak for the Democrats. The first woman to lead the city of Miami. She also spoke frequently in the Hispanic majority city about the Trump's immigration crackdown. So there are some reports, you've probably seen, Rhino, that the Hispanic voters are starting to waffle a little bit on the president. And that's something that we should be aware of, as they are a huge demographic when it comes to elections. She doesn't seem to be as crazy as Mondami. And but she is a Democrat, and I do think we have to at least take note of this defeat and be instructed by it. Ignoring it would be at our own peril, in my view. She led by about 19 points. I was just shocked. Now, the prior mayor, and I haven't checked, but I guess they have term limits, perhaps, because he didn't run again. Francis Suarez, you may recall, he's been the mayor since 2017, by the way. You may recall that he either came close to running for president, do you remember that? Or he was a candidate for like a week or something, and then he backed out. But he's a Republican, an Hispanic American, of course. 48 years old. I think he's a rising star in the party.
Yeah, there was actually just a referendum passed that would amend the city charter on November 4th, establishing lifetime term limits for the mayor and city commissioners.
Okay. Lifetime, meaning you could serve...
You can serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms.
Okay.
And run again. Or before the measure, you could serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms and then run again after a 4-year break. As a result of the measure, individuals can serve no more than 2 terms over their lifetime.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting.
The only caveat is if you are elected to fill a vacancy.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
That wouldn't count against you.
Makes sense. Well, Francis Suarez was really a Trump supporter. I can't remember about said endorsed. I don't think he ever came out and endorsed him, but he was a very pro-Trump mayor. and very much a mayor focused on growing the city of Miami's economy. And it's also an extremely safe city. Miami is one of the safest in the country. You wouldn't think that just because it's a big metro area, port city, where you've got lots of just transitory movement, as you know, from the port there, inland, back and forth. But it's actually a very safe city relative to the others. And, you know, many people may not be aware it has a thriving financial community. I mean, it's a big-time financial mecca down there at the bottom of Florida. But it's a bit concerning that a Democrat just won election as a mayor and flipping the GOP's control on the city of Miami, which, again, is a fantastic city. If you haven't been there in a while, I think you'd be shocked to know or to see just how booming it is down there. We're going to step aside for a break. We got Maya McGinnis, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, at 11:05. Mandy Gunasekara, former EPA Chief of Staff, at 12:05. Stay with us.
This is Andy.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
We're rolling. Hit it. Go. Play it.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. So, on the C Spire text line, by the way, that's 601-879-4395. Ben from Madison says, these off-year elections have been rough for Republicans. Every Republican up for re-election next year should take notice and don't take anything for granted. Absolutely. Susie Wiles, White House Chief of Staff. Is it Wiles? I said that right, huh? Or is it Biles? I'm now having a little memory fart there.
Wiles.
Okay, had it right first time. So she yesterday said that the president is approaching the midterms like it's 2024. And I couldn't help but think of the famous Prince tune, Party Like It's 1999, right? That's what I thought about. So she said that he's going to be engaged in the midterm elections. He's going to use his fundraising apparatus to provide money to Republican candidates where he believes there's a need. He may even personally contribute as well. So he's taking it seriously, and I suspect that his inner orbit is telling him that. We don't need to take this for granted. We don't need to take it lightly. And so he's out and about the country, starting yesterday in Pennsylvania, on kind of a barnstorming tour, talking to the people. This is something he's really good at, really enjoys, thrives in, is being on that stage with a podium and a big sound system where he can address the people and speak directly to them about his ideas, his accomplishments, and what is the outlook for the country under his administration. Hard to believe. It's been 10 months. He's got 3 years and 2 months remaining in the term. But I'm glad to see him get out and about because I think it is important. Now, as I said yesterday, I do have concerns when you've got the pulpit there and you're telling people how great everything is. From an economic perspective, I just believe if you've got to explain that to get one's attention and to attain their approval of that, that might be problematic. What you hope is that they just see it because they're experiencing it in their own households, in their own personal financial environments, and they like what they see, and they'll vote accordingly. Now, one good thing is the price of gas has been coming down. That's largely due, there's a number of factors, but three main ones. The increase in output here in the U.S. is one of those, but to a greater extent, the increase in output by Saudi Arabia, who's kind of gone a bit rogue with the rest of OPEC in that regard. And then you've got some declining demand happening abroad, mainly China, whose economy is struggling. They don't want you to know that, of course, and the communists lie their butts off about it, but it is struggling. So that is
causing... You've seen an influx of, ooh, look at this Chinese mega city with all the neon lights, and it's like, I didn't realize neon lighting was futuristic.
Exactly.
Welcome to the future of the 80s.
Oh, man. That's terrible. Sad. But you're absolutely right. Totally the truth. So that's kind of where the president is on that yesterday with respect to, again, production of oil. He did say, rightfully so, we're producing more than we ever have. I'm talking about the daily output of oil in this country. He's absolutely right about that. But I will point out, we've been producing more than we ever have for about 3 years now. It didn't just start this year. So record output began in 22, honestly. 12.9, 13 million barrels per day. We're at 13.8, I think, in the last report. For 2024, Joe Biden's final year in office, we averaged about 13.4 billion barrels per day. This year, we're averaging 13.6 million. So there's a tick up in output, and we are seeing that at the pump. Now, in this studio for months, Rhino, I would just share with the audience the average price of oil, and it was just hovering around that $62 to $65 a barrel range for months this year. But in the last month, we've seen it stay under $60 a barrel, which is good news. Haven't checked it today. Yesterday, I think it closed about $58 a barrel. So all that's translating into lower prices at the pump. Yeah, today it's $57.83. So it continues to fall. And we've got a few states now that are reporting an average price of regular, check me on this, I heard this early this morning on the Business Channel, of $1.99, a one handle. Is that right? For regular. They getting over their skis on that one? That sounds low to me. It may not be an average. Maybe there's just some reports of retail gas sales at that rate. That would likely be in Oklahoma and Mississippi. That's where typically the lowest price per gallon is found in the country. What are you saying? I know you're looking at that right now. So
yeah, there still have to be a ways to go before it'd get a one handle.
Well, that's what I thought. But I swear I heard that this morning, and I know the president said that most states were at the two handle range. I don't think most are. I think about half are. But we got a little ways to go. But that's a decline.
Yeah, Oklahoma's averaging 229.
Okay, for regular, for the lowest grade, right? Okay.
Which, I mean, that's close to having a one handle, but that's
right.
still
Not
30 cents away from it, and 30 cents is a long ways in gas prices.
And my guess is at the beginning of the year when the president took office, Oklahoma typically having the lowest price per gallon in the country, my guess is they were around $3 at the beginning of the year, right? And we've seen a kind of a steady decrease since then. But there's no doubt that...
Looks like start of the year, average price for gallon nationwide, $3.13.
That's right. And then it it's kind of around that $3 range, I thought, nationwide. So we've seen about a 10 to 15% overall decrease, which is good. And I do think that the fossil fuels friendly policies that the president has implemented are a major factor in that. We know that with the prior president, he was an anti-fossil fuels guy, of course, beholden to his left-wing nutcase base that want to totally end the production and consumption of fossil fuels, which is totally asinine and not grounded in any fact. In reality, I should say, not fact, but reality. So hopefully that translates into lower prices, because energy is obviously a key ingredient in virtually everything we consume. Always has been. It's just something the Democrats have never wanted to acknowledge. They don't like to acknowledge the fact that, you got to have that stuff we take out of the ground just for our very survival and existence. Unless you wanted to return to life on the planet as it was about 200-something years ago, right? What an invention it was when somebody figured out, hey, that stuff that we can get out of the ground, we can actually use that to convert it to energy. And, of course, the rest is history. Also, there's been tremendous, this gains in technology in the finding of, the identification of oil and gas deposits and the extraction of. Again, technology, AI, data centers. Actually, think about that. They're using technology that's housed and powered by data centers to get more oil and gas out of the ground.
But I mean,
just true.
Long-term scale, that's just the cycle of history repeating itself.
100%. Absolutely right.
Early metal workers were using metal they found on the surface and in easily to find rocks. And when they ran out of that, they had to start mining. And then mining technology grew as the need progressed. Same thing happening here.
Totally agree. So yesterday I didn't get to this, but Ben from Madison said it'd be a good thing if both Alito and Thomas retire before the end of next year. They're both old, and it's such a gamble to bet they'll make it through 32 if a Democrat is elected and a Republican loses the Senate, and it would be tough, I agree, to get someone to replace them confirmed all the way through it. And that's in response to the president who came out. There were some rumors of them possibly retiring. He came out a couple of days ago, said, no, I'm fully in support of them and endorse them on the bench. So we shall see. Coming right back.
Okay,
Is everybody ready?
I'm ready.
Ready here.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. We appreciate you being with us today. So we were talking about Mr. Trump, the president, who has come out and said, it was Monday, he sort of gave his blessing to the two Supreme Court justices that it was rumored might be poised to retire and just step off the court, which means then the president would appoint their replacements, and they'd have to go through the advice and consent process there in the U.S. Senate to ascend to the bench. And this is what Mr. Trump said, the president. I hope they stay because I think they're fantastic. Okay, this was a response to a reporter's question. Okay, both of those men are fantastic. That's what he said of Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, the two oldest members of the court. Man, I got to tell you, it seems like just yesterday I was watching the circus that was the Thomas questioning, testimony, hearing up there in Washington in the Senate. Remember that? I remember that goofball.
I mean, I don't remember it. I remember seeing clips of it.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I don't remember his name. Was it Shelby? It was the Alabama senator. And he was, of course, taking his time, as the various senators do there, starting right with the Judiciary Committee, I believe, and then it goes before the full Senate for advice and consent and approval of the president's nominee. And so when Clarence Thomas was on the Hill testifying, actually, I take it back. This was over the Anita Hill debacle. That's what I remember. And you guys may remember that. I'm trying to remember all the details, but there was allegation about sexual misconduct with the Justice Clarence Thomas and I think one of his clerks, right? Anita Hill. Was that her position, as I recall? And they were involved professionally somehow. They had a relationship. They were colleagues. I don't remember the exact title. But nonetheless, she had alleged some sort of sexual misconduct. So they dragged the justice up for questioning, for an inquisition, essentially.
That was during the confirmation hearing.
It was? Okay. All right. Because it was, he had to explain that, essentially, and get past that with them. Okay. I thought maybe it was two separate incidents, but thank you for clarifying. It's been a long time, right? 80s? Is that right?
91.
Okay. Early 90s. Well, where I was going is, I don't remember the Alabama senator at the time. I can still see that smug, condescending, pompous goof. And he asked a question. He was, I believe, a Democrat and was opposed to Clarence Thomas's nomination. And he was believing Anita Hill completely. I mean, without question. And I just remember he asked, I don't even know what this means, asked Thomas, are you a martyr? Are you a martyr, sir, as I recall? And then Thomas composed himself and answered that question, but you could see the look on his face. What a stupid question that was. Who was the senator back then? I can still see that guy that had, as I imitated a bit, the old, more classic Southern gentleman accent, though I didn't consider him to be a Southern gentleman. It wasn't Shelby, was it? I don't think he was around then. But he was...
let's see. Howell Heflin was a senator that retired after he was reelected in 90.
That's him. I just looked him up. I recognized the face immediately. That was absolutely him. And he was the one Democrat. Back when Alabama, we had the Blue Dog Democrats still kind of in control. And Howell Heflin was the one that asked that question. Oh, man. Questioning. And you know what I immediately thought was, this guy, Thomas, that was appointed, nominated, and was going through this process, he could run circles around Heflin from an intellectual perspective. It was almost like, this is backwards. I get it. You're a U.S. senator. These are our rules. These are our laws. You're fully within your right to question this candidate that the president has nominated. That's the way our process works. I fully respect that. But I'm just thinking, you don't even deserve to be in the same room with this guy, honestly. Because Thomas is intellectual, obviously. You would expect they all would be. If you're serving on the Supreme Court, you'd like to think that they're deep thinkers and they compose themselves and consume lots of information and process it and analyze it before they utter a word. We now know, having seen the DEI appointments under Joe Biden, some of them ain't real smart, shall we say. And one of those may be the worst Supreme Court justice ever, and that would be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And in the case of Trump versus Slaughter, which is all about whether or not the president is within his purview of terminating people that he could hire. I could hire them, but I can't fire them. Who operates an organization like that? It's crazy that we even have to go to the Supreme Court to sort that out and get a ruling on that. But she goes off onto this no kings rant. You saw that during the oral arguments yesterday. So, but no, we don't politicize our institutions like you, Justice Brown. You couldn't wait to get your 2 minutes of fame and go off on this stupid anti-Trump rant without any regard whatsoever for the case before you. So that would be an example of one who doesn't think before they speak. And I'm quite sure that people would say, Gerard, you're being a racist. No, I'm just analyzing what happened, the reality of what happened. So she assumed the nonpartisan, independent nature of all these various agencies, but fish can't comprehend water, So to Jackson, liberalism is like self-evident without thinking about politics. She really wants to, essentially, she's advocating for amending the Constitution to create this fourth branch of government. And I'll have to give it to Vivek Ramaswamy. He talked about this extensively on his campaign tour, and I'm not sure it's sunk in. And he would say, hey, there are only 3 branches of government that are authorized, commissioned in our Constitution, not 4. And you and I have talked about it before. These agencies have got a life of their own. They got these career faceless bureaucrats that have more of an impact on our lives than the 535 people we elect. And by the way, they don't get elected. They don't spend any money, and you can't blow them out of those offices. And that's what this case is all about, to enable the chief executive, whom the people elect, to have that power. That sounds reasonable to me, but not to Ketanji Brown Jackson, because she knows that this president would make some sweeping changes, more so than he already has. And the arguments about some changes he made at the Federal Trade Commission, they're all upset about that. And I don't want to get into it too much, but I'm personally aware of a situation where there are like 2 different opposing factions, literally, politically, in one agency. And it's rather than carrying on the work of the agency, the people's work, it's more about playing politics within the agencies. This is the deep state swamp the president talked about back in his first term. That's what he's talking about. It's not the people in Congress. They can't get squat done. It's the people that are appointed by the president that go essentially carry their water. And Joe Biden was maybe the worst at putting people in place. Speaking of which, what about this, did I see this right? Mondami, who did he just appoint there, Rhino, to lead some big task force or something effort that's got a record, got a rap sheet or something? What's that all about?
Yeah, his transition team is made up of a kaleidoscope of crazy people.
Gosh. Oh, my gosh. Like the community safety team, whatever the heck that is. He's got some person who believes in the end of policing and who want to reallocate resources that go to law enforcement to social services. So when you got some nutcase all drugged up that's brandishing a firearm and threatening to kill people, we're going to send a social worker in there, unarmed social worker. Oh, yeah. We're going to step aside for a break. We're coming right back in the Element Well studio.
Hey, this is Bob, and if you're like...
It's so awesome!
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Come on, let's get on with the show!
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Okay, so up there in New York City, besides these crazy people that Mondami has picked, like the anti-police activist, anti-cop activist, is going to advise him on criminal justice. The other one that just happened yesterday that he picked to head his community safety transition team is a person who battled pill addiction and that at one point was taking 20 to 30 pills a day. Now, certainly we have to acknowledge that a person could rid themselves of that addiction and straighten their lives out. I just don't know if it makes sense at this point to bring them in as the community safety transition team director. I don't know the person, don't know all the background, but earlier this year, this person is an activist. Tamika Mallory, no surprise that it's an activist, said she struggled with a serious dependency on prescription drugs before entering rehab. And it's, like I said, don't want to prejudge. Perhaps she's cleaned her act up. She's all good to go. But as you also know, Rhino, that's been determined to be more of a short circuit in the brain. You can't just go through rehab and say, okay, I'm done. I mean, right, you're constantly battling the temptation because you're just wired that way. And scientists are actually developing on drugs, treatments, therapies to sort of address that issue to curb an addictive personality. So you're just kind of putting yourself out there at risk, are you, as the mayor in this case. Maybe there's another fit for this person if they've truly been, and I'm all about giving people a second chance. If they've truly been rehabilitated, maybe they're somewhere else. But the community safety transition team, is it just me? But I'm thinking you got to have somebody that's super squeaky clean. Maybe he doesn't know anybody that is. He may not have any relationships with anybody that is. But we'll see where all this goes. Here at home, by the way, you may have seen that a couple of our Supreme Court justices were, after a long time, confirmed by the U.S. Senate to federal judgeships in Mississippi's northern district. So this vacates a couple of seats on the highest court in the state of Mississippi. Good article about this, by the way, at SuperTalk.fm. Caleb Saylor's the author. And so a Trump-appointed judge has received the go-ahead from the U.S. Senate to operate on the bench at the federal level in North Mississippi, 51-48. They approved Robert Chamberlain to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Mississippi. Chamberlain is a member of the Mississippi Supreme Court, won that open seat in 2016, ran unopposed in 2024. So now the governor would appoint, correct? So would we have an election in the next statewide election? Is that the way that'd work? They'd hold the seat until then? Or would they keep the seat until its term ends, which are 8 years in Mississippi for a Supreme Court seat? I believe it's the way it works. So, again, I'm not sure what our law says about would we have to, as it would be, so, for example, for a U.S. Senate seat that's vacated, you appoint, the governor appoints, but then the seat would be contested. An election would be held in the next statewide race, I believe is what our law says. So Supreme Court, I'm not sure. What does it say, Rhino? What do you say?
If less than half the term is left, they serve the entire remainder, or they serve until the next general election if more than half the term remains.
Okay. So in this case, more does remain. So then
they'll serve until the next general election. Well,
that would be 2032, according to my calculations. If Chamberlain, if I'm reading this right, was reelected in 24, that would be the way that works. So this will be an interesting development in the state of...
They would have to run in the next election. That wouldn't be 2032.
For Supreme Court, what election are you talking about? It's 8-year terms, what I'm saying.
Next general election.
Just any general election.
Yes.
Statewide general election is what. Okay. So that would be this coming fall for U.S. Senate, right? So you'd hold the seat for roughly a year and a month or so. Well, depending on when the governor appoints. I'm not sure how much time he has to do that. I'm sure there's some law around that as well. Okay. But whoever he appoints, you would think would have the upper hand. It typically is the case in the next election. So I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. The next general election, not the next election for that seat. So they wouldn't hold it for that.
The only way they would be
sense.
able to skip the general election is if they were appointed within 9 months of the election.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. I think that's logical. Well, that's interesting. That's what's going on here in the state of Mississippi. And then the other thing, the big news out of Washington a couple of days ago is a $12 billion funding of some aid for our farmers, and that affects the state of Mississippi, although it's my understanding that our timber, our forestry farmers may not be on the list of recipients. We're trying to get some folks in on the show, I think, later.
Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays from the Element Wealth Studio on this
Hump Day.
All right, so the president, he took a little shot at Jerome Powell during his speech on the economy yesterday in Pennsylvania, still imploring him to lower them interest rates, and the Fed is meeting today. It is largely believed that the Federal Reserve governors who vote on the interest rate direction will actually reduce the rate by the benchmark rate by 1/4 point. 1/4 point. That's all we seem to be getting at this point. So most are estimating that they're going to be more next year. That's kind of what the prognostications are. But at this point, it looks like we're going to get 1/4 point. That's honestly baked into the markets. The Dow presently up 200 points. The NASDAQ is in the red today, down by 50 points. Microsoft, NVIDIA taking it on the chin. Not exactly sure what's going on with Microsoft today. But they're seeing their stock fall during today's session in trading. So we'll certainly see where all that goes. But he hit Jerome Powell yesterday pretty hard in his speech on the economy. He says his slogan is higher wages and lower prices. That's what we can expect, according to the president. And he says that he inherited a big mess from the Biden administration, and he aims to correct it. But I think it's understandable that as we approach the midterms, he's really going to focus on and highlight in his speaking as he travels across the country that this affordability message, this mess that we're experiencing, is a direct result of Democratic policies. I think there's some truth in that. During the Biden administration, lots of regulatory policies that were anti-business and a lot of other anti-business sentiment and rhetoric, no doubt, played a huge role in the boost in the cost of living. But the main thing was the passing of that American Rescue Plan, the ARPA, which was just a continuation, honestly, of the COVID aid that got underway in the president's final year. And that's causing, still, we're dealing with the effects of that. It hasn't gone away, and it's not. I don't think we can expect that prices are going to return to the pre-COVID era or even the pre-2021 era when the inflation really got going. And during the first several months of 21 after the bill was passed, of course, all the smart folks were telling us, all those PhDs in economics that work in the administration were telling us it's transitory. But in 22, we saw inflation spike to 9%. And it's fair to say that aggravated lots of people. And once that is injected into the economy, you're not going to reverse that. If we did reverse it, that means we're contracting from an economic perspective, and that's not good. That means recession, and the consequences of that are typically massive loss of jobs. So we haven't experienced that. So he says he's working on getting prices down, and again makes it very clear that the Democrats are to blame for all this. Now, I will point out that January of 2025, the CPI was 3% inflation. November 2025, it's 3%. Really hasn't changed. What has changed is that wages are up. So again, when your wages are outpacing the increase in cost, you should have a net gain. That's so-called real wages, and that's why his slogan, his branding for this tour, the speaking tour he's going on right now to address this affordability issue, is lower prices, higher wages. So absolutely, if those move in different directions, we all benefit from that, 100%. I do think that's a bit of a tough sell, honestly, to the people are impatient. We've become accustomed to
it's a tough sell because you're talking about averages, and all it takes is for someone to think, wait, I haven't got a raise.
Yeah, that's right. And it is an average. And the people that have not personally experienced that good fortune of seeing their wages rise are saying, yeah, that's not helping me. But and he touted this tariff policy. Really, he made 10 points. He said, I have no higher priority than making America affordable again. The Democrats gave you high prices, and we're bringing those prices down. Well, the bringing prices down, it's absolutely true that the price of gas has dropped a little bit. And that's due to a combination of his policies. Again, Saudi Arabia stepping up production and China reducing demand. But clearly this president is pro-fossil fuels and pro-American energy, and just that fact alone will stimulate more production. It's not actually a whole lot. We just shared that with you. It was about 13.4 million barrels a day average, which is the most in our country's history. In 2024, under Biden, it's about 13.6 under this president. And, of course, as we see supply increase and prices come down, then the oil and gas companies get a little hesitant to boost production because that drives price down and that cuts into their profit. They don't really have any control over that. The market controls that, something Joe Biden never understood, that oil is a globally traded commodity on a daily basis, just like many food products are. Those are traded commodities. It's like the ultimate free market dynamics. He also said that affordability is a hoax. He insisted that consumer prices were falling, quote, tremendously. Prices, I'm quoting now, prices are coming down tremendously from the highest prices in the history of our country. Of course, he lashed out at Democrats over what he called a hoax. So I'm curious about our audience. Do you feel like that affordability and higher prices are those hoaxes, or what's your personal experience with that? He also highlighted the scale of revenue he believes that tariffs are generating. Here's what he said, quote, "We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars, really trillions." Actually not true. We have taken in hundreds of billions of dollars. In 2024, in Biden's last term, it was about $150 billion of tariff revenue, mainly because, probably not widely understood, but Biden actually retained the tariffs imposed on China during the president's first term. He didn't reverse those, surprisingly. So we did generate $150 billion of tariff revenue in 24. We're on a run rate of about $300 billion in 2025. Trillions over several years, yeah, but over a single year, it's $300 billion. And he said that he felt like that particular policy is encouraging investment across the states. He said, if you look at all the companies that are pouring their money into building plants in Pennsylvania and many other states, auto plants, AI, he called them AI plants, plants of every type, which we would have never had if we didn't impose tariffs. The actual net of manufacturing, the manufacturing industry in this country is pretty level if you look at what's been closed down and shut down versus what new has come on. That's actually a wash. So we really haven't seen tremendous. The exception is artificial intelligence. Virtually all the growth in our economy is stemming from artificial intelligence and related industries. Virtually every bit of it. In fact, since the pandemic, every other industry is flat. The only one that's growing is the technology industry and artificial intelligence. He did say, which is correct, that more Americans are working more than any time in the history of the country. Before I took office, 100% of all net new jobs were going to migrants and illegals. Not totally true. He said 100% of all net job creation is going to American citizens. So what do you think about that, Thomas? Because you've been contending that that's not true. They're all going to foreigners under the H-1B visa program in certain industries. And we'll also continue this discussion on the other side of the break. There's a couple more points he made yesterday that I think are important we need to be aware of with respect to our pocketbook. Stay with us.
I don't need your rocking chair.
Entertainment. Interrupt this program.
Gerard Gibert.
Here we go.
This is huge. Huge news. Huge news. Huge.
You need to listen to this.
Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Well studio. We need to pass on that Maya McGinnis, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, with the president of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, was scheduled to join us at 11:05. We did announce that in the last hour, but had a conflict, and we're going to get her back on. And she wants to talk about the $12 billion farm aid package. And I do subscribe to the Committee for Responsible Budget's newsletter. I enjoy that and learn a lot from it. And they actually sent one out. I call it a newsletter. It's a subscription that you just get information and articles, papers, etc., analyses via email. And they did issue a press release yesterday about the $12 billion aid package to farmers. And they were critical of it. Maya, the president of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, who was unable to join us today, but hopefully will in the next day or so, said something right on a point we've made rather regularly, which is every dime that goes out, we're borrowing half of it. We don't really have the money. I understand that everybody has some justification for federal money that they receive. So yesterday, Rhino, we had someone that is a firefighter. And I made the point, you've heard me say this before, that there's so much widespread corruption in these various grant programs. Maybe it's time to just end grants. And I know that would cause problems for a lot of folks who rely on those. But we can't seem to get control over them, and they're no doubt good uses. It's not a matter of, well, yeah, there's some situations where those grants are being put to good use. And this was a firefighter who said, we rely on FEMA grants for equipment, a volunteer firefighter in the state. I get it. I'm not saying that that's not a good use of money. I'm simply saying we're $38 trillion in debt. We're headed to 40 within a year of debt based on the CBO's projection of borrowing for the first 2 fiscal months, first 2 months of the fiscal year. That when do we ever say no? When do we ever just say we ain't got it? And it's the same thing with the farm aid. I get it. The farmers are struggling and they need assistance. But does it make sense to go borrow money to do that? Because that's what we're doing. You can't deny it. I mean, that's just the mathematical financial fact. And the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget points that out, says, quote, there's simply no money in the federal budget for bailouts. If there is a true emergency, we should address it, but we should do so by covering the cost rather than passing the bill to the next generation, a generation that is already inheriting a record amount of debt. If lawmakers choose to provide new funds to farmers to help with the disruptions from tariffs, they should fully offset those costs. Yeah, at a minimum, let's go find $12 billion today that we just strip out of the spending mechanism. Goes on to say, and this again is Maya McGinnis, who's the president for the Center or Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. If lawmakers choose to provide new funds to farmers to help with the disruptions, they should fully offset those costs, ideally in order to stick to the super pay-go rules, which basically say we don't increase spending in one area without reducing it on a commensurate basis elsewhere. Include a down payment on deficit reduction. They should offset the cost 2 times over. That's the super pay-go. Pay-go is, I'm going to spend $1 here, I'm going to cut $1 there. Super pay-go is, I'm going to spend $1 here, I'm going to cut $2 there. I love it. But whether done through executive action or through Congress, any new farm aid should not be debt financed. So it's not that, again, we don't believe the farmers. I think due to the disruption caused by the trade policies are entitled to some relief. Absolutely. And I know that's a huge deal right here in the state of Mississippi. It's just that we didn't really consider that, well, if we're going to shell out $12 billion, maybe we need to cut $12 billion elsewhere before we do that. And what Maya's recommending, cut $24 billion before you send out that $12 billion. This is why we're approaching $40 trillion of debt. We just haven't been responsible because there haven't been any consequences for it. We keep electing the same people. We keep advancing the same policies. And there just doesn't seem to be any relief or end in sight. The president also yesterday, he said that the largest tax cuts in American history will put thousands of dollars in the pockets of hardworking, he was in Pennsylvania, so he said hardworking Pennsylvanians with the largest tax cuts in American history. That's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security for our great seniors. Yeah, that's actually not true. Social Security is still taxable. There's an increase in the standard deduction that is going to create a scenario where about 80% of Social Security recipients will not have any income taxes due. Right now, it's about half and half. About half of Social Security recipients have enough income such that some of their Social Security is taxable, and about half don't meet those thresholds, and thus their Social Security is presently not subject to federal income tax. It's taxed differently, by the way, folks, than is the standard ordinary income. There's a different set of thresholds for that and a different application of taxes to that. So the no tax on overtime, just want to point out, that went into effect January of 25. So did tips, so did the increase in the standard deduction, so did the increase in the SALT deduction, state and local tax deduction, so did the deductibility of automobile interest, by the way. All that went into effect January 1 of 25, and the increased child tax credit is another one. And then the refundable option credit, up to $5,000 if you would adoption credit, if you adopt a child. So, to deduct interest on a vehicle, you have a threshold of $10,000, and it has to be a new vehicle that's assembled in a U.S. plant to qualify for the deduction. And there's an income limit on it as well. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But these things were implemented, and they're retroactive to January 1, so there's no doubt that you will see that factor into refunds in 2026 for your 2025 taxes. But as far as 2026 coming up, not going to be any difference in your paycheck between 25 and 26. Those provisions are already implemented. And remember, these are deductions. These aren't exemptions as far as tips and overtime. And it's the premium portion of overtime. So if you make $1 an hour and your overtime's time and a half, $1.50, it's the 50 cents. It's the half a dollar that is deductible off of your income for income tax purposes. On the C Spire text line, just to the mention I made a minute ago that the president has contended that folks are experiencing a better financial situation in their households. I asked, what's your personal situation on the C Spire text line? Times are still pretty tough for average families, Gerard. I haven't seen any improvement in salary, and groceries are still just as high or worse. The price of beef is a big thorn in my side. And that's to your point, Rhino. Some people have seen their wages increase, and this measurement of real wages is an average. Now, good news is here in Mississippi, our real wages, as measured by the federal agencies, enjoyed a 5% increase. Real wages are your nominal wages adjusted for inflation. So if you got a raise of, let's say, 10%, but inflation went up 5%, I'm just using hypothetical numbers, that means your real wages increased by 5%. It's netting it out of inflation. So that's the good news. And Mississippi ranks second in that category, and the governor, rightfully so, is promoting that fact, that recent finding and report. That's good news. But I think that folks are still struggling. And, yeah, I agree on the C Spire text line, beef. And I think I mentioned last week the president of Omaha Steak says because of the cattle shortage, that's why we're experiencing big-time record prices of beef. He thinks the price of ground beef is going to $10 a pound in the early spring as a result of that. So I don't think until the herd is replenished, I don't think we're going to see any relief there. I don't know that there's anything the government can do necessarily to bring down the price of beef. We're coming up after the break from the Element Well studio.
From the Seabrook, Gerard Gibert. He keeps his classified documents right where they belong. Inside a Journey record jacket from the 1980s. Gerard Gibert, SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is middays from the Element Well studio. Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. On the C Spires text line, why are we sending $400 million more to Ukraine in the new defense spending bill? I can only guess that that's because members of our Congress believe it's in our best interest to support Ukraine and their efforts to, win the war that seems to just be raging on and on and on and on with Russia. Russia seems to be cozying up more and more to China, and they're playing a little bit of a game of poker, it seems. Xi Jinping and Putin trying to outdo each other in that respect, but they're also kind of have the common interest of inflicting harm on this country. So I can only say that. Paul and Meridian, how much money are we still sending to Ukraine? I choose American farmers over Ukraine any day. I completely agree, Paul, but that still doesn't address the $38 trillion of debt, headed to $40 trillion. And again, I completely believe that we owe our farmers something. I just think that what the Committee for a Responsible Budget said, let's cut $24 billion of spending elsewhere as a way to finance this financial aid being sent to our farmers, who we got to have. I mean, they're essential. You see, this is the problem when government gets involved in so many areas that it shouldn't. Rather than taking care of things that are priorities, like food. And it's absolutely true that the tariff and the trade policies are largely the drivers of the problems and the financial challenges our farmers are experiencing and facing. Not 100%. There's been challenges in our agricultural industry for a while. That just didn't start this year and after these various trade policies were implemented. That's been going on. But $400 million to Ukraine in a $7 trillion budget. And by the way, the budget in our defense authorization bill, which is supposed to pass today, just under $1 trillion. So you could do the math there. That's 0.04%. That's not going to be anything to write home about. I fundamentally oppose it, and I fundamentally support helping out our farmers. I just think it needs to be done in a more methodical, thoughtful, responsible way. That's all. And there seems to be just a super hyper focus on the foreign aid. I think it's more of the optics. From a financial and math perspective, it's nothing. From an optics perspective, it's big. People just say, well, gosh, we're struggling here at home. Why in the world are we sending money abroad when we have all these problems at home? Our precious veterans, for example, homeless, struggling with addiction and their health and other problems, but yet we send money abroad. I mean, it's ignorant, honestly. And that bothers people, and especially after the Doge team came in and exposed a lot of the craziness. It's unbelievable to me that we had to have third parties come in from the outside to expose some of that. We can't figure that out. With all the people we got running around Washington, we had to bring in somebody from the outside.
Welcome to the world of the not my problem people.
Gosh, dog, that's just unbelievable. On the C Spire text line, when I ran my small business, no government grants supported me and my salary. Yeah, and that's just in response to my contention that maybe we ought to take a hard look at just ending grants. And so, by the way, Rhino, what I said yesterday to our volunteer firemen that wrote in and said, yeah, we rely on these FEMA grants, which are federal grants, for many of the assets we use to fight fires. And I'm certainly in agreement that those are necessary assets to protect society and their property. That's a core function of government, in my view. It's just that should it come through, it's the funding mechanism. Does it make sense to fund it through federal grants that have, as you say, an army of not my problem people behind the scenes pushing a pencil, right, that you can't terminate, and then we got to go to the Supreme Court for the president to get permission as the chief executive of the country to fire people who ain't doing nothing. That's just ludicrous in my view. So what I said was, maybe we ought to fund that at the state level. Why are we taking federal grants, which means we're borrowing money for that purpose? Let's figure out a way to fund that at the state level, especially given the good financial times that we're experiencing right now. And I mean that from the perspective of generating surpluses now for about 5 years in a row. But I know that lawmakers, you know this, they don't say no to federal money. Nobody says, no, don't give me that money, without thinking about, well, geez, that's why we're $38 trillion in debt. Everybody's got something, that they're benefiting from. It's coming out of the federal government. Nobody wants to cut it off. That takes a lot of willpower, a lot of courage. So as a result, we keep racking up the debt. And everybody complains about that. Well, obviously, you can't have both. That's the only point I'm making here. So reducing the budget by $1 trillion to a balanced budget. Oh, here we go. Essentially, the country is already bankrupt on the ceasefire text line. What of it? There's absolutely no possible way to remove $40 trillion in debt. It would take 50 years of reducing the budget by $1 trillion to achieve a balanced budget. So does all this mean anything? Well, the country's not bankrupt, and here's why. You can't look at just the deficit. I know that there's a tendency to look at that, but you have to look at the deficit relative to the country's assets. So bankruptcy means that your liabilities exceed your assets. The country has sufficient assets to cover its liabilities. It's the approaching we're doing now, the approach to a point where that ratio of debt to our output, our GDP, that's what's bothersome. That's why we can't get interest rates down, for example. That factors into the market's investment in bonds and securities, and that's what dictates interest rates. So the best way to get out of this trap, as the president has said, is to keep growing our economy, but you got to do that at a faster clip than you're growing the spending. That's how you offset it, and how you mitigate it, how you manage it. So what it means, it's a good question. What it means is that if we don't continue to grow our economy, it's mainly growing your economy is done through productivity, which means adopting all this new technology so that we can produce more. And that mitigates the inflationary effects of deficit spending and borrowing money. That's the key. And so you need policies that promote economic growth. I believe we have those. I do. But in the short term, because everybody wants it now, in the short term, I think people are feeling the pinch, honestly. And they want to see some relief. Now, Jerry in Waynesboro sent a quick list. I'm not sure who posted it. But on this list says zero tax on tips, pocket an extra $25,000. Well, up to $25,000. That's absolutely true. If you have an income of $150,000 for a single filers, $300,000 for married couples, you can deduct your tip income from your gross income before you calculate your taxes, up to $25,000. That'll be around for 4 years, 25 through 28. And then it says zero tax on overtime. Just keep in mind that that's just the premium portion of overtime, and it's a deduction against your income. It's not an exemption. Social Security, full deduction, protect your retirement. Not true. There's not a full deduction. There's an increase in the standard deduction, which just means that when you calculate the amount of Social Security that would be subject to income taxes, that threshold increases. Right now, about 45% of Social Security recipients actually pay taxes on their Social Security income. Some 60% don't. So already 60% without this provision. It is going to increase it to about 80%. And this is temporary. This will only be around for 3 years. And then the ability to deduct automobile interest for a newly manufactured domestic vehicle, absolutely true. You can deduct up to $10,000 annually in interest on such a vehicle, but your income has to be below $100,000 for an individual and $200,000 for a married couple filing a joint return. And then the child tax credit, honestly, that's just welfare. It goes from $2,000 to $2,200 is what's happening under the big beautiful bill, and that will be some welcome income for a lot of taxpayers with children, no doubt about it. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Up of Mississippi.
Bring the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert, Middays with Gerard, SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays from the Element Wealth studio. On the C-Spire text line, a lot of the problems with pricing or companies during COVID saw a way to increase profit margins, and as long as they don't see a slowdown, are maintaining their margins. Eugene. Well, yeah, Eugene, that's just free enterprise. That's who doesn't try to sell their labor for the most they can get for it? Now, taking into consideration other factors, obviously. But in general, most people are motivated by the amount of money they can receive in a job. Now, I agree. There are many other factors that figure into that you have to weigh in. But in general, people are coin operated. Well, the same is true for companies. They're going to try to maximize their profits by finding the optimum price point that produces the revenue that's accepted by, received positively by the market to buy their goods and services, to operate, produce a profit, maximize their profits. That's capitalism. In socialism, the government tells you, here's how much you're going to make, what you're going to sell it for, who you're going to hire, what you're going to pay them. So this is just the market at work. No doubt that during the COVID period, what happened was we shut the dang economy down, and that produced shortages, supply chain squeezes on lots of goods and services. And naturally, when you've got a reduction of supply and demand doesn't really decline in a corresponding way, sure, you're going to have inflation. And then, of course, the government addresses the fact that people were shut down by dropping money out of helicopters, which we did in 2020 and 21. There's no doubt that the whole COVID thing turned the world upside down, and we haven't yet fully recovered from that. But corporate profit is essentially regulated by the market. And if people weren't buying that stuff at that price point, then their profits would, of course, suffer. But if you look at the profit chart versus income, and I did that, the Federal Reserve publishes that on a regular basis, it's still fairly parallel. We've seen profits increase. We've seen wages increase. They're still fairly parallel. So the more people make, they spend more of it typically, and that produces more profit, especially if it's a well-run corporation that can scale its revenue without adding cost to produce more. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of a company. How can we produce more with the same input cost? That's how you drop money to the bottom line, and that's what investors and stockholders expect. Unpopular opinion: get rid of Social Security, and that would start balancing the budget. Well, yeah, that is an unpopular opinion, I would say, to the tens of millions of people that receive Social Security, especially those that only have Social Security as income. So here's the thing, though, to the C-Spire text line person. If you ended Social Security, that means you would also end contributions from wage earners into the program. At the same time, ending benefits going up. Guess what? Wash. Really doesn't address the deficit issue. Doesn't address the debt issue. Right now, that's a wash. It's a little upside down. We crossed the line a couple of years ago. This is the problem and the concern we have about Social Security because it's a pay-as-you-go system. That's how it was designed in 1935. But the number of people getting benefits out has been steadily increasing as our population ages and we live longer, and the number of people working and paying in has been steadily decreasing, so that ratio just continues to shrink. We're at about 2.5 to 1, 2.5 workers for every recipient. Wasn't too long ago, about 40 years ago, we were 5 to 1. There was a time in the 40s and the 50s we were 15 to 1. Nobody worried about it. We got plenty of people entering the workforce, and they're paying in, and we got a few people that are getting benefits out. And by the way, they don't live very long, so they're not collecting those benefits for very long. So that, unfortunately, wouldn't address the problem. It's about a wash. If you just took that out of the federal budget, in other words, exclude the revenue coming into it, that's the contributions we pay in, and exclude the benefits going out, you don't gain anything. And the other thing to keep...
Other than the boost to the economy of everybody suddenly having that money in their pocket instead of going to Uncle Sam to go right back out the door to somebody that is earning it, quote unquote.
Agree, but you're not considering the fact that all of those older people that are getting that money wouldn't be getting that money anymore. So they don't have money to spend. So I don't know that we gain anything from that. It just depends on who spends more, the old people or the young people, right? Because the old people, probably most people in their Social Security benefits, the last I checked, about $2,800 is the average benefit. I think they spend every dime of that to live. Man, it's just a big old problem that we got to keep working on. Fox News, SuperTalk News coming up next. Mandy Gunasekara, former EPA Chief of Staff, joins us next.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's the afternoon portion of MidDays live from the Element Wealth Studio on this
Hump Day.
It's our pleasure to welcome now Mandy Gunasekara, former EPA Chief of Staff. Hey, Mandy, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Gerard. It's great to be back with you.
So we've been talking a lot this morning. A whole bunch is going on, and I know you as well track what's happening in the landscape of politics and public policy on both the state and national levels. Let's start with the state here. We finally sort of broke the logjam up there in the Senate and got a couple of judges appointed in the Northern District of Mississippi. And that, of course, vacates a couple of seats there on the Mississippi Supreme Court. It just seems like that we've just been at a prolonged pause, that the Democrats are doing everything they can to obstruct the president's agenda, including just getting these appointments through.
Yeah, and the Democrats have shown a willingness to try and hold up every single nominee across all administrative levels and including in the court system. And remember how important the judges that were appointed during the first Trump administration ultimately were to being a firewall against some of the most extreme Democrat efforts, mainly going after President Trump and some of the COVID-era policies back in early 2021 and 2022. So these judge positions are really important. They're really important for our state, especially making sure that those positions are filled so that they can move important cases forward. I also think, too, more broadly in talking about the nominees and what's playing out in the Senate, it's really frustrating to see how the Democrats are trying to stop appointees that in previous administrations, no one's going to put up a real fight because they aren't highly political positions, but they are important in terms of making decisions and moving broader policy agendas forward. Obviously, the Democrats have not been willing to cooperate even in the Senate in areas where traditionally that has been the case. And so President Trump's been expressing some frustration with the processes of the Senate and how the Democrats have been using Republicans' adherence to that to try and undermine getting good people in positions that matter to achieve the overall agenda. So good news from Mississippi that we got those positions filled, but more broadly, there's still the logjam because of the Democrats' obstinance. They seem to not realize they did lose the election, the presidential election, just a year or so ago. But nonetheless, they're trying to slow this down. There's some potential reforms on that front. There's a lot of positions that shouldn't, frankly, be subject to this Senate oversight. But nonetheless, it's where we are, and the president continues to try to push his agenda fast and forward nonetheless.
You know, as a business person, I think about just the constant need for human talent, right? And it's just a sense of urgency around it all the time because you can't produce revenue and profit unless you got the people on board. I mean, most businesses do have a labor component. But government, there's just no sense of urgency. Oh, well, we don't have a couple of judges in place, and so the docket just piles up. No big deal. And the president, of course, is a business person that's used to having to make snap, quick, difficult decisions in his real estate and business career. How can we get more of a business approach in our government? And I know that's been confounding those of us who believe we should for quite some time. It just seems like it's desperately needed, Mandy.
Yeah, it is. And you bring up a point of significant debate and discussion in D.C. Personnel is really important. I will say that there are ways to get your people in place prior to the nominations process. This was something I recommended to the folks making the personnel decisions in the Trump White House. They've embraced it at certain agencies, which is getting people into the most senior politically appointed position that doesn't require the Senate advice process or the Senate nominations process. But still, I think that there are some low-hanging fruit when it comes to getting people into positions that matter just for the efficiency of the government to actually function. Now, I could say, well, obviously the Democrats don't want the government to function. They made that very clear with the historic length of the shutdown.
Yeah.
They would rather the government not function, so Trump looks bad, than to agree on positions that aren't highly political but do matter in terms of Americans receiving legitimate services that they rely on. You would think that we could agree on just getting folks into those positions so you don't have this major backlog, especially so when it comes to court cases. But there's also been this trend from the left where they think judge positions are highly politicized because they have increasingly relied upon them to subvert the co-equal branches of government and try to use activist judges to push their policies anyway.
So related to that somewhat, what do you think about this Supreme Court case? We talked about it earlier on the program that, well, essentially the court's going to decide what sort of power the president has over terminating employees in the executive branch. It just seems crazy to me that they can hire them, but they can't terminate them. Do you have any prediction on the outcome of the ruling there?
Yeah, I mean, I would think, look at the trends from the start of this administration. Just about every single case that has come before the courts, once it gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is important because it's more of an originalist court where they adhere to the law, not to the whims of one political belief over the other. And nonetheless, the trend has been to support the president's position that he is the executive and he has the ability to shape the size, scope, and number of full-time federal employees within the administrative agencies that do report to him. So I think it will be favorable for the president's larger efforts to get rid of positions that are a drain on taxpayer resources, do not meaningfully contribute to the various missions of the agencies. And so I would think that the courts, generally speaking, the trend has been to affirm that executive role, which, as you rightfully pointed out, it just makes so much sense for businesses, but also for the general functioning of the federal government.
Yeah, 100%. And they seem to be leaning, as you say, an originalist styled court, seem to be leaning in that direction. So hopefully we'll get a decision on that. So my contacts in Washington, Mandy, and I know you're even more plugged in than I am, indicate to me that we literally do have competing factions politically within the same agency. That we got people trying to, as you say, obstruct. They're obstinate, I think is the word you use, obstruct the agenda. And you got people that have come on board since the president's been in place that are trying to advance his agenda. So they don't seem to be working together to really discharge the function and the tasks of the agency.
Well, and that's at the heart of what the president and his team over at the Office of Management and Budget, that's currently run by Director Ross Vogt, are trying to do. They're trying to get the politicization of the civil service ranks out. Those positions are really there to ensure efficiency and a continuation of key federal services as the political appointees, the political leadership that ultimately runs the direction of the agencies changes or can change from term to term. What we've seen, and the problem is in recent years, you've had politics soak into that civil service class, and you have activists in positions where you really should have someone who is not really political. They obviously can vote one way or the other, but isn't actively engaged in the day-to-day politics. And so that's what the president's larger personnel decisions are shaped around getting rid of. We need civil servants. They are really critical to the agencies delivering a variety of services, but you can't have some in there that take those positions of public trust and use them to push a political agenda. The politics should start and end at the top level, the leadership positions that direct the agency's direction, overall direction. And there's been a disconnect, but there is once and for all a very clear effort to try and get that politicization out of those lower ranks so that the federal government can run better, more efficiently, and save taxpayer dollars in the long run.
Well, I've made this point on the show many times. It feels like our daily lives as Americans are more impacted by the actions and decisions made by the faceless bureaucrats in the agencies than they are the people we send to Washington.
Yeah, that's right. I read a whole book about this. It's called Y'all Fired.
Right.
And it really, the essence of it is how in the world did we get to a point where the unelected bureaucrat has more sway than the individual American citizen? And shifting that back is where we're in the process of right now.
I agree, and I think the president has rightfully pointed that out from his first term. I think that's what he referred to as the swamp. We got to drain the swamp. That's where the swamp is, more so than in the Congress. We can drain that at the ballot box, but we need the chief executive to have the power and the purview over those agencies. Mandy, always good talking to you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Wealth studio.
Patriotism is a
Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
So I think it's good that the president is focusing on this cost of living, affordability issue. I do think that's going to be the major factor in next year's midterm elections. And the president, of course, predicting lower cost, bigger paychecks. That's his slogan. I think it's a good idea. It reminded me, I got to tell you this, Rhino. I think I had you play this one time a couple of years ago out on YouTube. there is a friend of mine who is kind of a political history junkie, right? So he's posted several stuff on YouTube. It's the old campaign ads from, in this particular case, the 60s. Ross Barnett, governor of the state of Mississippi, and for 2 terms. So, his slogan was, and it was very popular back then to have some sort of catchy campaign slogan set to music, and his was "Roll with Ross." There's people out there that are listening, watching, probably remember that. So in the little jingle, the "Roll with Ross," there's a point there where he's, of course, promoting himself to be the governor, and he says something to the effect, you can expect bigger, better pay. And so it kind of reminded me of that when the president saying higher wages and lower costs. It's kind of what his slogan has developed into. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out as the president does the barnstorming tour around the country. He also said that he grades the economy, when asked about that, he grades the economy A+++++. A++++++. A and 5 pluses. The polls, however, don't reflect that same sentiment, and that's just something to keep in mind. So I think it's good that the president is getting out, and I think people are going to be expecting that the situation is going to improve in 2026, as is being projected by the president and his Treasury Secretary, his chief of the economic advisors in the White House, largely thought to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve, Kevin Hassett, and we'll certainly be on standby to see where that goes. Expected to name Powell's replacement, who doesn't exit the post until next May, I believe, but the president is expected to announce who that will be here pretty soon. The Democrats are feeling their oats, however, having scored election wins last month. Campaigns focused on affordability, as we reported earlier in the program. One down in Miami, that one shocked me. Republicans have held the mayor's seat in Miami for 30 years, and now a Democrat comes in and wins it. And so there certainly is something to be concerned about. I do think the tax policies are going to be a key to boosting economic growth. The Treasury Secretary is predicting as much as 3 to 4% GDP growth. That would be tremendous. That's more than we had in the president's first term on an annual basis over his term, and it's certainly more than we got under Joe Biden. So typically that means wages are rising, and also means that small businesses are thriving, enjoying the benefits of a growing economy. Many of them rely on big businesses to perform well economically, financially. And then, of course, the $12 billion deal to the farmers. And somebody on here said, Sam in Greenville says, don't know about the rest of the country, but the farmers around here don't seem to be hurting too bad. They already get subsidies galore. I don't know, Sam, that's certainly not what I'm being told from the agricultural community. I do know this, that you remember this, Rhino, last year, man, the banks were folding up on these farmers and not willing to support them with short-term loans. That's typically how that industry operates. The crop farmers in particular, they borrow money to put the seeds in the ground, cultivate the fields, and then they wait till they harvest and they sell their yield and pay those loans back. But many of them not producing much in the way of profit. Many of them upside down, underwater, and the banks were hesitant to take that risk. So that was a problem. So I'm not sure, Sam. I appreciate you texting that in. That seems to be a bit inconsistent with what we're hearing. Ben from Madison, I understand our farmers need some relief this year, but various reasons, including the trade war with China. But are we going to bail them out every year? Well, it is true what Sam said earlier. There's this thing called reference pricing. I think I got that right, Rhino, that we had Mike McCormick, remembers, explained it on our air before. Mike McCormick, the CEO of Mississippi Farm Bureau, the building in which we're located. That's their headquarters. And he's explained that, and I think I got this right. You can help me out, Rhino, that essentially once the farmers essentially calculate and determine after they've sold their yield what their average price per whatever the unit of measurement is for the particular crop that they produce, that if that's below some sort of standard level expected pricing, then the government fills in the gap. Right? Did I get that right? I think that's the reference pricing model, if I'm not mistaken. So you sold it for
price loss coverage.
Okay, there you go. So, the market was such that the most you could get, because they don't have any control over it. That's the thing that I just don't think the Democrats get. It's the way oil works. It's the way farm produce and products work, that you're subject to really pure market dynamics, which is a good thing. But just depending on demand and supply, that's how it works. When you go to sell those products on the open market, and if the reference pricing is $1.50, for example, is and I'm not sure what the process is of determining that, and you sold it for $1, then the government picks up the 50 cents that you were unable to achieve on the open market. Is that basically the concept, Rhino? I think, yeah. So that would be the so-called subsidies, and I think that's typically incorporated. And what you hear them talk about a lot, the Farm Bill, right? I think that's where that's included, which is part of the USDA's funding mechanism, as I understand it. So, and Mississippi has got a huge agriculture industry, so it's important to understand this and its impact on our overall economy here in the state and the state's GDP and just the economic health of the state and its citizens. But Ben goes on to say, are we going to have to do this? Because if they're going to grow soybeans, if the Chinese don't buy them, who in the heck we're going to sell them to? They don't want bailouts, and I agree with you, Ben. I want to be clear about that. Our farmers don't want that, but we also need them. We need them planting beans and cotton for fiber and food products. We need all that for human sustenance, but they got to make a profit at it. We got to figure that out, and it is complicated. But I also certainly agree with Ben that we don't want to be in constant bailout mode, and I agree with you, Ben. They don't want that either. They just want to be able to farm and earn a living. And that's what I want them to be able to do as well, so we still got some work to do there. David from Bruce says, the guy from Greenville doesn't know what he's talking about. The family farms, they do not. Yeah, and that's my understanding as well, David. I do think you're right that if you distinguish them from the corporate, right, rhino farmers, there are some economies of scale they achieve, which is also true to a great extent why so many of them have sold their farms to the big conglomerates. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. It just depends if you're okay with monetizing your family's assets in that respect. I did read a report, I think I got this right, where last year, this bothered me, 181 farmers filed for bankruptcy in this country. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider just how small the number is of farmers, that's bothersome at a minimum. When politicians campaign on reducing government, this is on the C Spire text line, it's smoke and mirrors. If they lay off employees such as low-paid employees, mental health counselors, for example, then they turn around and hire third-party contractors to provide the same service formerly provided by employees. Well, I agree with you. There's no net savings there. But I do think, though, wouldn't you agree, to this individual who texted us, this was about 30 minutes ago, I would have to say that there are a lot of positions in government that we probably could do without. But as we're seeing, it's extremely difficult to close down those positions, if you will. and make a transition there. You just can't terminate people easily in government at all levels of government. We got news on Rudy Warnock after the break, and I'll tell you who that is and what just happened. Stay with us.
From the Middays with Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. We appreciate you joining us. Elon Musk says that Doge was only somewhat successful. They claim $214 billion of annual savings, which comes in at let's see here, about 3% of spending. But I think what analysts are now saying, that dig underneath the covers there, that much of what was reported as saved was either already in process or grossly overstated. So the true number is less than half of that. And, of course, he's not around for that anymore. But lawmakers are reporting they're still looking to cut government waste and fraud, and I certainly hope that they do. But I wanted to pass this on. This is just breaking. You may have heard it on our news clip there. Rudy Warnock was sentenced to 12 years in prison in connection with a Canton bribery scheme. He was a Canton Municipal Utilities engineer, and he was going to spend 12 years in prison. That's after U.S. District Court Judge Christy Johnson handed down the sentence to Mr. Warnock's, levied a fine of $100,000 against the defendant as well, and refused to waive the interest on those payments. It apparently was blatantly obvious that Rudy Warnock was involved in a bribery scheme. This was alleged for quite some time here in Madison County, and there's all kinds of allegations of impropriety, but ultimately this is what they got him on, and we're able to get a conviction alongside former CMU Commissioner Cleveland Anderson. So, I mean, what was going on there? He was an engineer that was essentially bribing the utility company for business. This was done at the expense of the good people of Canton. He bribed public officials to line his own pockets. And now, of course, you've seen the scuttle about, at least those of us around the central Mississippi area. And I know this story may not even be familiar to folks outside of the central Mississippi area, but this is a case that's been dragging on for a while. It's long been thought that Warnock was involved in bribery schemes with the utility and others, but this is the one that just went down. He billed them for more than $7 million in invoices, and he bribed city and CMU officials, treating them to a bunch of trips and shopping sprees, tickets to concerts, sporting events. The FBI was alerted to this scheme by a whistleblower, and numerous interviews, investigators determined that he and others were involved. His attorneys continue to characterize it as a gratuitous case rather than a bribery issue. Oh, come on, give me a break. I know it's what you get paid to do, is put your best legal argument forward on behalf of your defendant. Otherwise, you would be breaching your professional obligations. But I'm glad to see this happening. This has been going on a while. So I got to take this opportunity, Rhino, to point out again something you've heard me say and probably sick of hearing me saying it. But this all goes back to this exemption for competitive bidding in state of Mississippi law that goes back decades for certain professional services, and engineering is one of them. So this wouldn't have happened if he had been required, or if the Kent Municipal Utilities, the city, owned by the city, had been required to administer a proper competitive bidding process. Because all you got to do here is say, hey, I'll give you some money here if you'll pick me. And literally the decision makers on the board show up, say, let's hire Rudy over there to do our engineering. All in favor say aye. That's the procurement process. And it is abused across the state of Mississippi. I'm not saying it's abused from the standpoint that every contract's got bribery involved. Don't get me wrong. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's abused by virtue of the fact that we don't competitively bid these services. There are other services as well which are exempt: legal, accounting, insurance. There's a list. It's all specified in law. But it's got nothing to do with what vendor provides the best value to the taxpayers. I'm not saying it should always be the lowest bid, but it is absolutely possible to craft a properly structured request for proposal and a bidding process that would, in fact, select overall the best vendor. And there would be some consideration on multiple criteria, price being one of them. But just the fact that you run the process pretty much assures that you're not going to have this underhanded crap going on. Brother-in-law deals, as we frequently say. And I would encourage everybody listening that you should go attend a Board of Supervisors meeting, a city council meeting, and watch this in action. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It happens on a regular basis. Best value is not always local. That's where it gets political. Right. I can tell you this from personal experience, that I got frustrated years ago in my business by losing out on out-of-state competitors that would come into Mississippi and poach, because in our industry, it represented really a small amount of revenue to them, and they saw it as incremental. Hey, we just play, and we just blow everybody else out of the water with pricing. We'll win, and what happens is it increases their business with their partners, which increases their volume, and that decreases their overall cost, which they make money on in the other states. You see what I mean? So they use Mississippi to bump their revenue incrementally to get lower pricing where they do make money. It's kind of like a lost leader. But those of us that live and work here, we were struggling. I literally went to meet with Governor Kirk Fordyce because I had found out that in the state of Texas, they actually have law. I don't know if they do anymore, but back in the 90s, they had law where in-state vendors on their pricing would get an adjustment based on being a legitimate in-state vendor, headquartered, by the way, in the state. Not just have an office there, headquartered, to allow them to fend off and to give preferential treatment to in-state companies. And I went to Governor Fordyce about this and asked him if he would consider championing such a policy. You know what he told me? He was right. He said, Gerard, the problem with that is then the other states would block us when we try to do business over there. And I did explain, well, sir, that is what's happening in Texas. Honestly, I would have no chance of doing business in Texas, but a Texas vendor could come in, does come in and poach here. But I'm more interested in the best value for the taxpayer. And often, certainly in the IT world, if you're from out of state and you're trying to descend upon here with resources to implement a solution, that's pretty dang hard to do. There is a lot of value in being local, but I'm not for a preferential treatment necessarily. But in this case, we don't even have a bid process for certain services in Mississippi, and it gets abused to hell and back. And Rudy Warnock knew it. All I got to do is, a little money under the table here, and they'll funnel all that business my way because there's no competition. There's no competitive bid process. I can charge whatever I want, and I can be bad at it as well and still win the business. That's happening across our state, and it needs to be addressed. And, you've heard me talk about this with legislators. They won't touch it. They're afraid. You know this. They're afraid. Oh, my gosh, the lawyers and the engineers and the insurance companies and the accountants and all that, they come out of the woodwork. So? And by the way, IT services, not exempt because the laws were created at such a point where there hardly were any IT services. And they've asked me about that, and I said, well, I tell you what, if you don't think it's important that you get the best vendor for those IT services, just unplug all them computers and see how long this place would last. Definitely not as long as it would if you didn't have any lawyers and accountants darken the doors for weeks. You can live without that. You can't live without them computers. Not for a minute. You go crazy if you can't get to it. We're coming right back with the final segment of Middays after the break.
Thanksgiving. From our family to yours. Middays with Gerard on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Middays, the final segment today as we are in the hump day of the week. On the C Spire text line, Jim in the Delta says, did anything happen to the recipients of the bribes? I haven't seen any news on that. Great question, Jim. All we see right now is the sentencing of the engineer, Rudy Warnock, going away for 12 years. And Rhino, I just read that he's 52. Did you see the picture of him? Man, it looks like this whole ordeal's taking a toll on him physically. He looks way older than 52, in my view. Of course, the ordeal that he's been through, you would think it would take its toll. Otherwise, you don't have a soul, and with that guy, I kind of wonder if you want to be honest about it. But we'll keep an eye out for that. I know our news department will, Jim, for sure, and there's, again, a great article at supertalk.fm Caleb Sailors just put up about it. Yep, and I was going to say this as well on the C Spire text line. I saw where CMU is having a rate hike of about 2 to 3 times the current rate. Are they using that rate hike to pay off Rudy? Just ridiculously poor management is what's going on there. Now, some people are trying to point to the data centers in Canton. No, that's not the case. This was in the works for a while. The bottom line is the utility is upside down financially, and this rate hike is necessary due to some poor decisions made in the past that have put them in this dire financial condition. Really unbelievable. And then somebody, on the C Spire text line, the 662, this was really welcome, and it was good, says, I know you got more to discuss in the farm bailout, as some call it. Honestly, I think it's a top profile issue, so I don't want to give the impression that we're dismissing this or overlooking it or not giving it the attention it needs. It is a big deal in Mississippi, and that's our audience, because we fully understand that our economy is essentially 1/3 agriculture. But this person says at just around 11 to 12% of disposable income on food in the U.S., that is the lowest food cost in the industrial world that might be considered the biggest subsidy of all for consumers. The money we handle is spent in our local communities on jobs, parts, foods, tires, mechanics. You get the picture. And small-town Delta towns are already in crisis mode, so please consider that. We don't have guaranteed wage weekly, monthly, or yearly to count on, not even mentioning retirement packages. It's all on us. Things aren't always as they appear, so just put some thought into these facts before throwing rocks. So I hope I didn't give the impression I was throwing rocks at farmers whatsoever. I deeply respect the farmers. I completely understand their value to not only the state but to the country. I'm simply making the point that we put ourselves in this position, especially with the tariffs and the trade policies. And really, I've made this point as well, that the farmers are good, really good at what they do. And they've benefited from lots of advances in farming policies, procedures, and techniques and technology. And they're producing more than we can consume, and that's driven the price down. So I'm certainly not going to argue the point, and wouldn't attempt to, that, hey, we're blessed in this country as far as what we spend on food. But I can also say that our disposable income is considerably higher than the rest of the free world. When you look at the poorest state in the nation, that being Mississippi, from the standpoint of per capita GDP and also household income and the median household income and per capita income, yet we have higher metrics there than the EU. So naturally, we would spend less of our money because we make more on food. Not trying to be argumentative, I'm just pointing that out. We're blessed in that respect, but that's just the market at work. Certainly, the producers could raise their prices or attempt to raise their prices, but I doubt their yields would be purchased. I mean, that's just plain old demand and supply and competition, and I know it's highly competitive. And I also certainly understand that agriculture is a huge contributor to the economies across the state, especially the Delta. 100% get that. But please understand there are a lot of other small businesses that would make the same contention, that they have employees that are residents of the community, and they spend money with lots of local vendors as well. So all that works together. And understand, no guaranteed weekly wages, monthly, et cetera. Same is true for all these other entrepreneurs. And I'm not dismissing that. I get it, man. I put my head down every night for 33 years worried about that. How am I going to make sure I get everybody paid and have a little left over to live off of? I appreciate that. I really do. And but I also understand that's just the nature of being an entrepreneur. That's part of the risk taking. I think the problem is that the reward's not there, Rhino, that it once was, and that's just a function of all these other dynamics. The trade wars, the incredible productivity that farmers are enjoying, which is good from that perspective, that we have an abundance and we're grateful for that, but it drives costs down and it's hard for them to make ends meet. I read something the other day about corn farmers are really struggling in this country. Things aren't always as they appear. I completely agree with that, and I hope, in all sincerity, I wasn't taking shots at farmers whatsoever. I appreciate their plight. I'm concerned deeply about them. We just got to get to a point where we don't need government bailouts, and I know you guys don't want that either. Stay safe, and God bless.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.